Matthew Reed stood outside the grocery store holding exactly $3.75 in his palm, counting it for the third time as if the numbers might magically multiply. His daughter Chloe needed milk for breakfast and bread for sandwiches. But this single father had just learned that kindness could cost everything, or maybe it could change everything. He didn't know that the trembling elderly woman beside him was about to test whether compassion still existed in this world. He didn't know she was connected to one of the wealthiest families in the state. He didn't know that 24 hours from now, his phone would ring with news that seemed impossible. But as he watched her fumble through her worn purse with shaking hands, one question burned in his mind. Could he really walk away when someone needed help more than he did? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The afternoon sun beat down on the parking lot of Miller's Grocery on the east side of town, creating waves of heat that shimmered above the asphalt. Matthew wiped sweat from his forehead and adjusted the baseball cap that had seen better days, its brim frayed and discolored from years of wear. He had walked the 2 miles from his small apartment because the truck had finally given up last week, sputtering to a permanent stop in front of their building. The mechanic quoted him $800 for repairs, which might as well have been $8 million given his current financial situation. Matthew was 32 years old, but felt decades older on days like this. His wife Sarah had passed away 3 years ago from complications during what should have been a routine surgery, leaving him alone with their daughter who had just turned 4 at the time. The medical bills from her final months had consumed their savings, then their emergency fund, then everything else they had managed to scrape together. Insurance covered some of it, but the deductibles and copays and experimental treatments they had desperately tried added up to a mountain of debt that still haunted him. He worked 2 jobs now, spending his mornings at a warehouse loading trucks and his evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. Between shifts, he rushed home to check on Chloe, who stayed with their neighbor Mrs. Patterson during the day. The elderly woman charged him almost nothing for the childcare, insisting that she enjoyed the company. But Matthew knew he was taking advantage of her kindness, and it ate at him constantly. Today was supposed to be a quick shopping trip during his lunch break. He had exactly 45 minutes to walk to the store, grab essentials, and walk back before his shift resumed. The $3.75 represented what was left after paying rent, utilities, and Mrs. Patterson's token fee. Payday wasn't until Friday, 3 days away, and the cupboards at home were nearly bare. Matthew had already done the math a dozen times that morning. If he bought the milk, Chloe would have something for her cereal tomorrow, but lunch would be problematic. If he bought bread, he could make her sandwiches, but breakfast would require creativity and probably involve watered-down juice and whatever crackers remained in the back of the cabinet. The mental gymnastics of poverty had become second nature to him, an exhausting calculus that never quite balanced no matter how carefully he planned. He remembered better days. Not that long ago, really, though it felt like a lifetime. When Sarah was alive, they had both worked full-time jobs that paid decently. They had never been wealthy, but they had been comfortable. There had been savings accounts and retirement plans. They had talked about buying a house someday, maybe taking a real vacation instead of just day trips to free parks and beaches. Those dreams felt impossibly distant now, belonging to a different Matthew Reed who had lived in a different world. The medical bills from Sarah's illness had consumed everything systematically. First the savings, wiped out in 3 months of experimental treatments and specialist consultations. Then the retirement accounts, emptied with penalties and taxes that made Matthew want to scream. Then the credit cards, maxed out and defaulted on when he couldn't keep up with minimum payments while also keeping a roof over their heads. Then everything else they owned that had any value, sold piece by piece until all that remained was the barest minimum. He had tried so hard to save her. Tried everything. Pursued every treatment option, no matter how expensive or unlikely. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic at first, then concerned, then gently pessimistic, then finally just compassionate as they explained there was nothing more they could do. Sarah had died owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to hospitals and doctors and pharmaceutical companies, and Matthew had inherited that debt along with his grief. Matthew approached the automatic doors, already doing mental calculations about what he could afford. A gallon of milk was $2.49. The cheapest loaf of bread was 99 cents. That left him with 27 cents, not even enough for the tax. He would have to choose between the two and figure something else out for Chloe's meals. That's when he noticed her. An elderly woman stood just outside the entrance, one hand clutching a shopping cart for support, while the other rummaged through a large purse that looked as worn as Matthew's cap. She was small and frail, probably in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite the heat, she wore a cardigan over a simple floral dress. Her hands trembled visibly as she pulled out coins one at a time, counting them with difficulty. Matthew slowed his pace, observing her struggle. He recognized that look of desperation, the same one he saw in his own mirror every morning. The woman's lips moved silently as she counted. Then she closed her eyes and took a deep breath that seemed to shake her entire frame. He should keep walking. He had his own problems, his own child to feed. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to mind his own business and focus on getting what little he could afford for Chloe. But something made him stop, some impulse he couldn't quite name or understand. "Excuse me, ma'am," Matthew said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, and Matthew was struck by her eyes. They were a clear, intelligent blue that seemed to pierce right through him, evaluating and measuring in a single glance. Despite her apparent frailty, there was something sharp and assessing in her gaze. "I seem to be a bit short," she said, her voice cultured and steady despite her physical trembling. "I thought I had brought enough money, but I'm astounded. I'm $1.30 short for my groceries." She gestured toward a cart beside her containing only a few items: bread, milk, eggs, and some vegetables. Matthew felt a familiar tightness in his chest. $1.30. He could give her that and still have enough for either bread or milk, but not both. He looked down at the coins in his palm, worn and dull, then back at the woman who seemed to be studying his face with unusual intensity. "I don't mean to be a burden," the woman continued, her voice softer now. "I've already checked, and they don't take cards here for amounts under $10. Something about their system being down. I just walked from the bus stop, and I'm not sure I can make it home and back again. These old legs aren't what they used to be." She offered a small, apologetic smile that somehow made Matthew's decision easier. Without allowing himself to overthink it, Matthew held out $2. "Here, ma'am. Please, take this. It's not much, but it should cover what you need." The woman's eyes widened slightly, and she made no move to take the money. "Young man, I couldn't possibly. You look like you need that yourself." "I'm fine," Matthew lied, forcing warmth into his voice. "Really, my daughter and I will manage. But you shouldn't have to walk all that way again in this heat. Please." For a moment, the woman simply stared at him, those sharp blue eyes seeming to look deeper than anyone had in a long time. Matthew felt exposed under that gaze, as if she could see every struggle, every fear, every moment of desperation that had brought him to this parking lot with $3 to his name. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the bills, her trembling fingers brushing against his palm. Her skin was cool despite the heat, and Matthew noticed how thin and papery it felt, like touching history itself. The moment their hands touched, something passed between them. Matthew couldn't have explained it if asked, just a sense of connection, of being truly seen by another human being. It had been so long since anyone looked at him as anything other than a worker or a struggling single parent or a man barely keeping his head above water. This woman, this stranger, looked at him like he mattered, like his choice to help meant something beyond the simple exchange of money. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed disproportionate to the simple transaction. There was something in her tone that made Matthew pause, a depth of feeling that suggested this moment meant more to her than it should. "May I ask your name?" "Matthew Reed, ma'am." He said it automatically, not thinking about whether he should give his name to a stranger. "Reed," she repeated, as if tasting the word, testing its weight on her tongue. Her eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition or surprise, though it passed so quickly Matthew couldn't be sure. "And you said you have a daughter?" Matthew nodded, glancing at his watch. His lunch break was ticking away. "Yes, ma'am. Chloe. She's 7 now. Smart as a whip and twice as stubborn." He couldn't help but smile as he thought of her, the way she insisted on reading bedtime stories to him now instead of the other way around. Her determination to help with everything even when she made more mess than progress. "She's lucky to have a father like you," the woman said, and something in her tone made Matthew look up sharply. There was an odd quality to her voice, a mixture of sadness and something else he couldn't identify. Not many men would give their last few dollars to a stranger. "It's not my last," Matthew said, the lie coming easily now. "And you're not really a stranger. We're all just people trying to get by, right?" The woman smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "Indeed we are, Matthew Reed. Indeed we are." She paused, then added, "I'm Evelyn, by the way. Evelyn Reed." The shared surname made them both pause. Matthew laughed, a genuine sound that felt foreign after so many stress-filled weeks. "Well, how about that? Tell me about Chloe," Evelyn said as they made their way to the checkout lanes. "What does she like to do?" Matthew felt himself relax slightly as he talked about his daughter. "She loves reading, which is great because books are free at the library. She's working her way through every fairy tale they have. Says she wants to write her own stories someday." He smiled, remembering how Chloe had declared this at breakfast just that morning, her face serious and determined. "She's always asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Where do dreams come from? How do birds know where to fly?" He shook his head with affectionate exasperation. "Sometimes I think she's got more curiosity than sense." "Curiosity is how we learn," Evelyn said. "Never discourage that in her. The questions matter more than the answers sometimes." They reached the checkout lane, and Matthew helped Evelyn load her items onto the belt. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager with earbuds visible under her hair, barely glanced at them as she scanned each item. Matthew found himself studying Evelyn more closely now. Her clothes were clean and neat, but clearly old, mended in places with careful stitching. Her shoes were practical and worn. Everything about her spoke of someone living on a fixed income, stretching every penny as far as it would go. Just like him. "That'll be $6.85, the cashier announced in a monotone. Evelyn carefully counted out the money Matthew had given her along with coins from her purse, her hands still trembling slightly. The cashier took the payment without comment, already looking past them to the next customer. "Thank you again, Matthew," Evelyn said as the cashier bagged her items. "You've been very kind. May I ask you something?" "Sure," Matthew said, aware that his lunch break was now definitely over. He would have to jog back to the warehouse and hope his supervisor didn't notice he was late. "Why did you do it? Give me the money, I mean. You don't know me. For all you knew, I could have been scamming you." Matthew considered the question, surprised by its directness. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess because I know what it's like to count every penny and come up short. Because if I were in your shoes, I'd hope someone would help me. Because my wife used to say that kindness doesn't cost anything, though I guess in this case it actually did cost something." He laughed ruefully. "I'm not explaining this very well." "No," Evelyn said softly. "You're explaining it perfectly." She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite the trembling. "You're a good man, Matthew Reed. Better than you probably realize. Your daughter is very lucky." Something about the way she said it made Matthew's throat tighten. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Evelyn collected her bags, only 2 of them, light enough that she could carry them. "I hope our paths cross again," she said. "Take care of yourself and that daughter of yours." "You too, ma'am. Be safe getting home." Matthew watched her walk slowly toward the exit, her bags clutched in both hands, her steps careful and measured. Then he turned away and headed back outside into the heat. The $3.75 he had started with now reduced to $1.75. Not enough for milk. Not enough for bread. Barely enough for anything. The walk back to the warehouse felt longer than usual, each step a reminder of his empty stomach and emptier wallet. He passed by familiar landmarks, the check cashing place with its garish neon sign that promised quick loans at predatory interest rates, the bail bonds office with barred windows and suspicious-looking characters loitering outside, the pawn shop where he had sold Sarah's jewelry last year to make rent. That particular memory still stung, standing at the counter with her engagement ring and wedding band, watching a bored clerk assess their worth with cold indifference. The money had kept them housed for 2 more months, but the guilt of selling those precious symbols had haunted him. This neighborhood was where people ended up when they had nowhere else to go, when life had stripped away their options one by one until only survival remained. Matthew had grown up in a decent middle-class area, had gone to good schools, had parents who believed in hard work and education as the path to success. Somehow none of that had protected him from ending up here, in this place where hope went to die quietly while everyone pretended not to notice. He thought about the $2 he had given away. $2 that could have been the difference between Chloe eating breakfast tomorrow or going to school hungry. $2 that represented an hour of his labor at the warehouse, sweat and strain and aching muscles. $2 that he would now have to somehow make up for. Maybe by skipping his own meals or by swallowing his pride and asking Mrs. Patterson for help yet again. But even as these practical concerns cycled through his mind, Matthew couldn't bring himself to regret the decision. There had been something in Evelyn's eyes, something in the way she held herself despite her obvious frailty, that had called to something deep within him. Maybe it was recognizing a kindred spirit, someone else who knew what it meant to struggle. Maybe it was remembering his own moments of need, the times strangers had helped him when they didn't have to. Maybe it was just the simple human impulse to ease suffering when you encountered it. Sarah would have approved. She had always been the first to help, the one who brought meals to sick neighbors and donated to every charity that asked and insisted they had enough to share even when they barely had enough for themselves. Her generosity had sometimes frustrated him when they were tight on money, but it had also been one of the things he loved most about her. That open heart, that reflexive compassion, that belief that people should take care of each other because that was what decent humans did. Matthew made it back to work 7 minutes late. His supervisor, a man named Rodriguez who had always been fair with him, simply nodded toward the time clock without comment. Matthew clocked in and hurried to his station, grabbing a dolly and heading toward the loading dock where pallets of inventory waited. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of repetitive motion, loading boxes onto trucks, moving pallets, scanning barcodes. His mind wandered as his body went through the familiar motions. He thought about Chloe, wondering what she and Mrs. Patterson were doing. He thought about Evelyn and her trembling hands, hoped she made it home safely. He thought about the empty cabinets waiting for him at home and tried to figure out what he could make for dinner with the limited supplies they had left. Maybe he could stretch the last of the pasta with some butter and salt. Chloe wouldn't complain, she never did, but he hated seeing the way her eyes lingered on the television commercials showing families gathered around tables full of food. She was too young to understand fully how tight money was. But she was smart enough to notice that they never went out to eat, never bought snacks at the store, never had the extras that other kids seemed to take for granted. When his shift finally ended at 5, Matthew clocked out and began the walk home. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had probably been nice in the 1970s, but now showed its age in peeling paint and cracked concrete. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his legs protesting after a full day of physical labor. Mrs. Patterson's apartment was right across from his. He knocked gently, and the door opened to reveal the 78-year-old woman who had become something like family over the past 3 years. She was short and round with white hair that she kept permed, and she had a smile that could warm the coldest day. "Matthew, dear," she said, ushering him inside. "Chloe's just finishing up her homework. We had a good day. She helped me make cookies." She lowered her voice. "I sent half of them home with you. They're wrapped up on my kitchen table." Matthew felt a familiar mixture of gratitude and guilt. "Mrs. Patterson, you don't have to do that." "Nonsense. An old woman can't eat 3 dozen cookies by herself. Besides, Chloe did most of the work. She's got a real talent for baking." Chloe appeared in the doorway to Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw her father. She was small for 7, with Sarah's dark curls and Matthew's gray eyes. She wore a t-shirt with a unicorn on it, one of the few nice things they had left from before Sarah died, and her jeans were getting too short in the legs. "Daddy," she called, running to him. Matthew scooped her up, ignoring the protest from his tired muscles. She wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him tight. "I missed you. I missed you too, sweetheart. Mrs. Patterson says you made cookies?" "Chocolate chip," Chloe said proudly. "I counted all the chips to make sure each cookie had the same amount. Mrs. Patterson said I was very precise." "That's my girl," Matthew said, setting her down and ruffling her hair. "Go get your backpack and we'll head home." While Chloe gathered her things, Mrs. Patterson pulled Matthew aside. "How are you doing, dear?" "Really? We're managing," Matthew said automatically. "Matthew," she said firmly, "I've known you long enough to recognize that non-answer. If you need help, you only have to ask." "You already do so much for us," Matthew said, his voice tight. "I can't ask for anything more." You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. She pressed something into his hand. He looked down to see a $20 bill. Don't argue with me. Take it. Buy that child some milk and something fresh to eat. And get yourself a decent meal while you're at it. Mrs. Patterson, I can't, Matthew started, but she cut him off. Yes, you can. Consider it payment for all the times you've helped me carry groceries up the stairs or fix things around my apartment. Fair trade. Matthew knew he should refuse. Knew he was already taking advantage of her generosity with the childcare. But he thought of Chloe's face when she opened the refrigerator to find it nearly empty. Thought of the groceries he could buy with $20. Thought of how he could make that money stretch through Friday. Thank you, he said quietly, pocketing the bill. I'll pay you back. You'll do no such thing. Now go on, take your daughter home. And Matthew, you're doing a good job with her. I hope you know that. Back in their apartment, Matthew and Chloe went through their evening routine. She showed him her homework, reading aloud from a book about a mouse who wanted to be a knight. They ate a simple dinner of pasta with butter and Mrs. Patterson's cookies for dessert. Chloe chattered about her day, about the picture she drew of their family that included Sarah as an angel watching over them, about the stray cat she saw outside Mrs. Patterson's window. After dinner, Matthew ran a bath for her, using just a few inches of warm water to save on the gas bill. He sat on the closed toilet lid while she played with the 2 plastic cups that served as her bath toys, pouring water from one to the other while narrating an elaborate story about sea captains and treasure. Daddy, she said suddenly, looking up at him with those serious gray eyes. Are we poor? Matthew felt his stomach drop. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Emily at school said her mom said we're poor because I wear the same clothes all the time and bring sandwiches instead of buying lunch. She said poor people don't have money for nice things. Matthew took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. We don't have as much money as some families, that's true. But we have everything we need. We have a home, food to eat, clothes to wear. We have each other. Those are the things that matter most. But we don't have mommy anymore, Chloe said, her voice small. Matthew knelt beside the tub, ignoring the water soaking into his jeans. No, we don't. And that's really hard. But mommy loved us so much, and she would want us to be happy and take care of each other. That's what we're doing, right? Chloe nodded slowly. I miss her. Me too, baby. Every single day. Will we always be poor? I don't know what the future holds, Matthew said honestly. But I'm working hard to make things better for us. And you know what? Being poor in money doesn't mean being poor in other ways. We're rich in love, rich in courage, rich in the things that really matter. Chloe seemed to consider this, then nodded. Emily's mean anyway. She says lots of things that aren't nice. Some people are like that. But you don't have to be. After bath time, Matthew tucked Chloe into the twin bed they had picked up at a yard sale. Her room was small, barely big enough for the bed and a small dresser, but she had decorated it with drawings and a mobile they had made together from paper stars. He pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and sat on the edge of the mattress. Story time, Chloe asked hopefully. How about you tell me a story tonight? You're such a good storyteller. Chloe's face brightened. She launched into an elaborate tale about a princess who could talk to animals and went on adventures to help everyone in her kingdom. Matthew listened, making appropriate sounds of surprise and interest at all the right moments, even as his mind drifted to their financial situation. The $20 from Mrs. Patterson would help, but it was a temporary fix. He needed to find a better-paying job, but that required time for interviews and probably some kind of training or education he couldn't afford. He was trapped in a cycle of working too much to improve his situation, earning too little to break free from the necessity of working those long hours. And then there was Chloe's birthday coming up in a few weeks. She hadn't asked for anything, hadn't even mentioned it, which somehow made it worse. What kind of childhood was she having where she didn't even expect a birthday celebration? And then the princess found a magical coin, Chloe was saying, that could grant wishes. But she didn't use it for herself. She used it to help all the people in her kingdom who needed food and homes and medicine. And everyone lived happily ever after. The end. That's a beautiful story, Matthew said, meaning it. You've got real talent, Chloe. Do you think mommy would like my stories? I know she would. She'd be so proud of you. He kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp, leaving only the night light on. It was shaped like a moon and had been Sarah's when she was a child. One of the few things of hers they had left. Daddy, Chloe's voice came softly from the darkness. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky. That's a lot. That's exactly right. Matthew waited until her breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep before he left her room, pulling the door mostly closed. In the living room/kitchen of their studio apartment, he sank onto the thrift store couch and put his head in his hands. He was so tired. Not just physically, though his body ached from the warehouse work. He was tired of worrying, tired of calculating every penny, tired of feeling like he was failing his daughter despite working himself to exhaustion. Today he had given away money they couldn't afford to lose to help a stranger. It was the right thing to do, he believed that, but it was also incredibly foolish. What if Chloe got sick? What if something broke that he couldn't fix himself? What if? The questions chased themselves around his mind until he finally forced himself up to get ready for his evening shift. He had to be at the office building downtown by 8, and it was already 7:15. He changed into a clean shirt, wrote a note for Chloe in case she woke up, though she never did, and headed out. The bus downtown cost $1.50, another expense he resented even as he recognized its necessity. He couldn't walk that far and still have energy to clean for 4 hours. The bus was nearly empty at this hour, just Matthew and a handful of other people heading to second or third shift jobs. Matthew stared out the window as the city passed by, thinking about Evelyn and her trembling hands, wondering if she made it home safe, wondering if 24 hours from now he would even remember her name, or if she would just become another face in the parade of strangers he encountered and forgot. He had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours, his phone would ring with a call that would change everything. He had no way of knowing that his simple act of kindness had been observed and evaluated, that Evelyn Reed was not who she appeared to be, that the shared surname was not just a coincidence, but a connection that ran deeper than he could imagine. Matthew Reed simply thought he had helped an old woman buy groceries. He thought he had done a small kindness that would cost him a little and be forgotten by morning. He had no idea how wrong he was. The morning started like any other. Matthew's alarm went off at 6, pulling him from a dreamless sleep on the couch, where he had collapsed after getting home at 1 in the morning. His back protested as he sat up, stiff from both the physical labor and the inadequate sleeping surface. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the cramped apartment with its second-hand furniture and bare walls. He went through his morning routine on autopilot, starting coffee in the ancient machine that sputtered and hissed but still produced drinkable results. While it brewed, he checked on Chloe. She was still sleeping, one arm thrown over her head, her dark curls spread across the pillow. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling the familiar mixture of love and fear that parenthood had instilled in him. In the kitchen, he poured himself coffee and assessed their food situation. The $20 from Mrs. Patterson sat on the counter where he had left it, a promise of groceries later today. For now, they had enough for breakfast, cereal for Chloe, and toast for him. Not much, but enough. He was halfway through his first cup of coffee when his phone rang. Matthew frowned at the unknown number on the screen. It was 6:30 in the morning, too early for telemarketers. He almost didn't answer, then reconsidered. Maybe it was the warehouse calling about a schedule change. Hello. Is this Matthew Reed? The voice was male, professional, and completely unfamiliar. Yes, speaking. Mr. Reed, my name is David Harrison. I'm calling from Harrison Industrial Corporation downtown. I apologize for the early call, but we have a matter of some urgency we'd like to discuss with you. Would you be available to come to our office this morning? Matthew's mind raced. Harrison Industrial was one of the largest companies in the state, a conglomerate that dealt in manufacturing, real estate, and half a dozen other industries. He had seen their name on buildings around the city, but had never given them much thought beyond that. I think you might have the wrong person, Matthew said carefully. I'm not sure what business I would have with Harrison Industrial. I assure you, we have the right Matthew Reed. The matter concerns an encounter you had yesterday outside Miller's Grocery on the east side. Does that ring a bell? Matthew's stomach dropped. The only encounter he'd had yesterday was with Evelyn. Had something happened to her? Had she fallen or gotten sick after they parted ways? Was he somehow being held responsible? I helped an elderly woman, he said slowly. Is she okay? Did something happen? She's perfectly fine, Mr. Reed. That's actually what we'd like to discuss. Would 9 o'clock this morning work for you? I understand this is short notice, But the matter is time-sensitive. Matthew thought about his warehouse shift, which started at 8. I have to be at work at 8. I could maybe come during my lunch break, around noon. I understand your work commitment, Mr. Reed, but I believe you'll find it worthwhile to make this meeting your priority this morning. We've actually already contacted your employer at the warehouse to inform them you'll be late due to urgent personal business. Your position is secure, I assure you. Now Matthew was completely confused and more than a little alarmed. How did you know where I work? What is this about exactly? All will be explained when you arrive, I promise. The address is 250 North Riverside, 42nd floor. Ask for David Harrison at the reception desk. We'll validate your parking, or if you prefer, we can send a car to pick you up. I don't have a car, Matthew said automatically, then immediately regretted revealing that detail. I'll take the bus. Very well. We look forward to seeing you at 9, Mr. Reed. The line went dead before Matthew could ask any more questions. He stared at his phone, completely baffled. What on earth was going on? He stood in his kitchen, coffee growing cold in his hand, trying to make sense of it. A major corporation was calling him about helping an old woman buy groceries. They had contacted his employer. They wanted to see him urgently. None of it made any sense. Unless something had happened to Evelyn after all. Maybe she had fallen or had a medical emergency, and they were trying to figure out what had transpired before that. Maybe she had family who worked at Harrison Industrial, and they were investigating. But why would that require him to come to their office? Why the urgency? Chloe's door opened, and she padded out in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Daddy? You look worried. What's wrong? Matthew forced a smile and set down his phone. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I just got a phone call about something I need to take care of this morning. But first, let's get you some breakfast. He went through the morning routine with Chloe, getting her fed and dressed and ready to go to Mrs. Patterson's. All the while, his mind churned over the strange phone call. Part of him wondered if it was some kind of scam, but what would be the point? They had called him, not the other way around. And they clearly knew details about him, where he worked, what had happened yesterday. At 7:30, he walked Chloe across the hall and explained to Mrs. Patterson that he had an unexpected appointment and would need to miss his morning shift. Is everything all right? Mrs. Patterson asked, her face creased with concern. I honestly don't know, Matthew admitted. Some company called about me helping that woman yesterday at the grocery store. They want to meet with me. Well, that's odd. But go, take care of it. Chloe will be fine here. Matthew kissed his daughter goodbye and caught the bus downtown. The ride gave him too much time to think, to imagine worst-case scenarios and best-case scenarios and everything in between. By the time he reached the address David Harrison had given him, he had worked himself into a state of anxious confusion. The building was one of those gleaming glass and steel towers that dominated the downtown skyline. Matthew had passed it countless times on his evening cleaning route, but had never been inside. The lobby was all marble and polish, with art on the walls that probably cost more than he made in a year. He felt conspicuously out of place in his worn jeans and old button-down shirt. The security desk directed him to the elevators. Matthew rode up to the 42nd floor, watching the numbers climb and feeling increasingly out of his depth. The elevator was nicer than his entire apartment, with wood paneling and a small chandelier. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was modern and expensive-looking. A young woman sat behind a sleek desk, her professional attire and perfect makeup making Matthew even more aware of his shabby appearance. I'm Matthew Reed, he said, approaching the desk. I have a 9 o'clock appointment with David Harrison. The receptionist smiled warmly. Of course, Mr. Reed. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. If you'll follow me. She led him down a hallway lined with offices and conference rooms. Matthew caught glimpses of people in suits having important-looking conversations, working at computers, moving with the purposeful energy of those who belonged in this world. He had never felt more like an imposter. The receptionist stopped at a large wooden door and knocked gently before opening it. Mr. Reed is here, she announced. Excellent. Send him in, came a voice from inside. Matthew entered what was clearly a personal office, spacious and well-appointed with that same impressive view of the city. A man in his 50s rose from behind a large desk, tall and distinguished looking with graying hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming on such short notice. I'm David Harrison, Chief Operating Officer here at Harrison Industrial. Please, have a seat. Matthew sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, his hands gripping the armrests. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm very confused about why I'm here. Of course you are. Let me start by asking, do you remember the woman you helped yesterday at Miller's Grocery? Yes, Evelyn. She said her last name was Reed too. Is she all right? She's perfectly fine. In fact, she's here. But before I bring her in, I need to explain something to you. David Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. The woman you helped yesterday was Evelyn Reed, and she is indeed related to you, though perhaps not in the way you might think. Evelyn is the mother of Gerald Reed, who founded Harrison Industrial 40 years ago. Gerald passed away 5 years ago, leaving the company in the hands of myself and his son, Victor Reed. Matthew's mind struggled to process this information. I don't understand. What does that have to do with me? Evelyn has been dealing with some difficult circumstances lately. Despite the family's wealth, she's been feeling isolated and questioning whether genuine kindness still exists in the world. She sometimes goes out dressed simply and tests whether strangers will help her when she appears to be in need. It's her way of restoring her faith in humanity, I suppose. So she was testing me? Matthew felt a flash of anger. That money I gave her, I needed that. I have a daughter to feed. She was playing some kind of game while I walked home with nothing. I understand your frustration, Mr. Reed, and believe me, Evelyn regrets any hardship she may have caused you. But please, let me finish. Your reaction, your immediate willingness to help despite your own obvious struggles, affected her deeply. She spoke to Victor about you last night, told him about your conversation, about your daughter. The Reed family has a tradition of supporting people who demonstrate exceptional character. They'd like to offer you a position here at Harrison Industrial. Matthew stared at him. A position? You mean a job? Exactly. We have an opening in our logistics department, starting at $75,000 a year with full benefits including health insurance, dental, vision, and a retirement plan. There would be training involved, of course, but we believe someone with your work ethic and natural compassion would be an excellent fit for our company culture. $75,000. Matthew couldn't breathe. That was more than twice what he made from both his current jobs combined. Health insurance. Benefits. It was impossible. It had to be some kind of cruel joke. I don't understand, he said again. You want to give me a job because I gave someone money for groceries? We want to give you a job because you gave your last money for groceries to someone you thought was a struggling stranger, David corrected. Because when pressed about why you did it, you showed empathy and understanding. Because you worked 2 jobs to support your daughter and still find it in yourself to help others. That's the kind of person we want in this organization. But I don't have any experience in logistics. I load trucks and clean offices. I'm not qualified for this. You'd be surprised what qualities matter most in business, Mr. Reed. Integrity, work ethic, the ability to connect with people, these things can't always be taught. The technical skills, those we can train. Would you like to meet Evelyn? She's been quite anxious to see you again. Matthew nodded mutely, still trying to process everything. David picked up his phone and spoke quietly into it. A moment later, the door opened and Evelyn walked in. She looked different than she had yesterday. Her clothes were nicer, though still modest, and she carried herself with more confidence. But those sharp blue eyes were the same, evaluating and measuring. Behind her came a man in his 40s, tall and imposing with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore an expensive suit and had the bearing of someone used to authority. Matthew, Evelyn said warmly, moving toward him. I'm so glad you came. Matthew stood awkwardly, not sure what to say or do. The man behind Evelyn extended his hand. Victor Reed, I understand you met my mother yesterday under rather unusual circumstances. You could say that, Matthew managed, shaking his hand. Victor's grip was firm but not aggressive. Please, everyone sit, Victor said, gesturing to the seating area by the windows rather than the formal desk arrangement. They settled into comfortable chairs, Matthew feeling increasingly surreal about the whole situation. Matthew, I owe you an apology, Evelyn began. My little test wasn't fair to you. David explained our offer, I hope. He did, but I still don't understand why. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be terrible at this job you're offering. We know more than you think, Victor said. After my mother told me about meeting you, I had our HR department do some background checking. Nothing invasive, just public records. Your employment history shows remarkable stability despite difficult circumstances. Your supervisors at both your current jobs had nothing but praise for you. Your landlord says you're quiet, respectful, and always pay rent on time, even when it must be a struggle. Your neighbor speaks glowingly of how you parent your daughter. You talked to Mrs. Patterson? Matthew felt violated despite understanding they had probably done their due diligence. We did, she said, and I quote, that you're one of the finest young men she's ever known, and that if we were smart, we'd do whatever it took to bring you into our organization. Victor smiled slightly. High praise from someone with no vested interest in embellishing. The truth is, Evelyn said, leaning forward, I've met a lot of people in my tests over the years. Most walk right past without acknowledging me. Some offer help grudgingly or with obvious reluctance. A few help enthusiastically, and I've learned to recognize when someone is hoping for something in return. But you, Matthew, you helped without hesitation despite clearly needing that money yourself. And when we talked, you weren't trying to impress me or gain anything. You were just being genuine. Plus, Victor added, there's the coincidence of the shared surname. When my mother mentioned that, I looked into it. Did you know that you're actually related to us? It's distant. Your great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather were brothers. The family tree diverged significantly, but the connection is there. Matthew felt dizzy. Related? To these people with their wealth and power and corner offices overlooking the city? I had no idea, he said faintly. No reason you would. The branches of the family lost touch generations ago. But my father always believed in taking care of family, however distant. And my mother believes in rewarding genuine kindness. So here we are, offering you an opportunity to change your circumstances. Victor pulled out a folder and set it on the coffee table between them. This is a formal offer letter with all the details. Salary, benefits, start date. There's no obligation, no strings attached. You can take it home, think about it, discuss it with whoever you want. But I hope you'll accept. Matthew opened the folder with trembling hands. The numbers on the page seemed impossible. $75,000 annual salary. Health insurance that would actually cover things without bankrupting him. 2 weeks paid vacation. Sick days. A retirement plan with company matching. What about my current jobs? He asked. I can't just leave them without notice. We would handle that professionally, David Harrison said. You'd give appropriate notice or we'd compensate them for the inconvenience. We're not asking you to burn bridges. And my daughter? I'd need to arrange childcare for different hours. The position has flexible hours, Victor said. 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. Weekends off, holidays off. You'd be home in time to pick Chloe up from school every day. It was too perfect. Too good to be true. Matthew had learned the hard way that life didn't hand out miracle solutions to struggling people. There had to be a catch, some hidden cost or expectation. Why are you really doing this? He asked, looking between the three of them. Please, just tell me the truth. Nobody gives a stranger $75,000 a year because they loaned an old woman $2 for groceries. Evelyn reached over and patted his hand, her touch gentle despite the trembling that still affected her fingers. My dear boy, I'm dying. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Matthew felt his stomach lurch. The trembling you noticed, that's not age, it's Parkinson's disease. Evelyn continued calmly. I've had it for 5 years now, and it's progressing despite treatment. The doctors say I have maybe 2 years left before I'll need full-time care, maybe less. It's made me think about legacy and what matters. My husband built an empire, but he also believed in giving back, in recognizing worth in people regardless of their circumstances. I want to honor that. And yesterday, in that parking lot, you reminded me that good people still exist. Mother has been depressed, Victor added quietly, questioning whether the world has become too cynical, too self-centered. Your simple act of kindness gave her hope. That's worth more than money to us. Matthew felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them back, overwhelmed by emotion. I'm sorry about your diagnosis, he said to Evelyn. That's a heavy burden to carry. It is, but meeting you lightened it a bit. Will you accept our offer, Matthew? He looked down at the papers in his hands, then up at the three people watching him with expectant expressions. This could change everything for him and Chloe. No more working 2 jobs. No more counting pennies. No more lying awake at night worrying about how they'd make it through another month. But it also felt wrong somehow, accepting charity dressed up as employment. He thought about his pride, about earning his way, about the value of doing things on your own. Then he thought about Chloe asking if they were poor. Thought about her wearing too small clothes and eating pasta with butter for dinner. Thought about how much Sarah would have wanted their daughter to have opportunities and stability and a father who wasn't exhausted all the time. Sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was wisdom. "I accept," Matthew said, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "And thank you, all of you. You'll never know what this means." "I think we have some idea," Victor said with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Harrison Industrial, Matthew. We're glad to have you in the family." The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and explanations. Matthew signed documents, filled out forms, received information packets about training programs and benefits enrollment. David Harrison walked him through the logistics department structure and explained what his role would entail, managing supply chains and coordinating with vendors and distribution centers. "We'll start you with a mentor," David explained. "Someone to show you the ropes and answer questions. There's a lot to learn, but we invest in our people. You'll have support every step of the way." They discussed start dates. Matthew explained his need to give notice at his current jobs, and they agreed he would begin in 2 weeks. That would give him time to transition out of the warehouse and cleaning positions properly and to get Chloe adjusted to the new schedule. "One more thing," Victor said as the meeting was wrapping up. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to Matthew. "This is a signing bonus. $20,000. Consider it compensation for the hardship my mother's test may have caused you and an investment in helping you get settled. New work clothes, maybe a reliable car, whatever you need." Matthew opened the envelope and saw a check with his name on it. $20,000. He had never seen that much money in one place in his entire life. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say you'll take good care of yourself and that little girl of yours," Evelyn said. "That's all the thanks we need." Before he left, Evelyn asked if she could meet Chloe sometime. "I'd love to meet the child who has such a wonderful father," she said. "Perhaps you'd both come to dinner soon?" Matthew agreed, still feeling like he was moving through a dream. He shook hands with everyone, thanked them multiple times, and found himself back in the elevator descending toward the lobby. He kept looking at the check in his hand, afraid it would disappear if he looked away. In the lobby, he stopped and called Mrs. Patterson. She answered on the second ring. "Matthew? Is everything all right?" "Everything is. I don't even know how to explain it. Can you watch Chloe for a few more hours? I need to go to the bank, and then I need to sit down and process what just happened." "Of course, dear. She's perfectly happy here. Take your time." Matthew went to his bank and deposited the check, watching the teller's eyes widen at the amount. He asked to speak to a manager and opened a savings account, something he hadn't been able to justify before when every penny was needed immediately. He transferred $15,000 into the savings account and kept $5,000 in checking. Even that smaller amount was more money than he had ever had available at once. Then he walked. He didn't have anywhere to be until his evening shift at the office building, and he needed time to think. He found himself wandering through downtown, looking at the city with new eyes. The stores he had always walked past without entering, the restaurants where he had never been able to afford to eat, the life that had always seemed to exist behind glass, suddenly felt accessible. He stopped at a children's clothing store and went inside. A saleswoman approached with a smile, and Matthew explained that his daughter needed new clothes for school. Together, they picked out jeans that would actually fit, shirts without stains or repairs, a new winter coat since the old one was getting too small. Matthew paid with his debit card, still not quite believing the transaction went through without any concerns about insufficient funds. Next, he went to a bookstore. Chloe loved to read, but they relied on the library because buying books was an unaffordable luxury. Matthew spent an hour browsing the children's section, selecting titles he thought she would enjoy. Fantasy and adventure, mysteries and stories about brave kids doing extraordinary things. He bought 10 books, promising himself he would add to her collection regularly now. He found a phone store and replaced his ancient phone that barely held a charge. He bought one for Chloe too, a simple model so she could call him if she needed. The sales clerk helped him set up a family plan that was affordable on his new salary. By early afternoon, Matthew was laden with shopping bags and feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. He grabbed lunch at a cafe, actually sitting down to eat instead of rushing through a meal between shifts, and tried to organize his thoughts. His life had changed in 24 hours because he gave $2 to a stranger. It seemed impossible the kind of thing that happened in movies, but not real life. Yet here he was, with a job offer that would change everything, with money in the bank and bags full of things for his daughter. He thought about Sarah. Wished she could be here to see this, to share in the joy and relief of knowing their daughter would be okay. She had died still worrying about leaving them in such a difficult financial position, apologizing through her pain for the medical bills she couldn't help incurring. If she could see him now, could know that things were going to be all right, maybe it would give her spirit some peace. Matthew pulled out his new phone and took a picture of the city skyline, wanting to remember this moment. Then he headed back to his apartment, stopping first at Mrs. Patterson's to pick up Chloe. She answered the door with Chloe right behind her, and both of them stared at his armload of bags. "Daddy, what did you do?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide. "I got you some presents," Matthew said, setting the bags down and kneeling to her level. "And I have some news. Can we sit down and talk?" They gathered in Mrs. Patterson's living room, Chloe bouncing with barely contained excitement about the shopping bags. Matthew took a deep breath and explained what had happened, keeping it simple for his 7-year-old. He told her about helping a nice lady who turned out to be related to them, about getting a job offer at a big company, about how things were going to be different now. "Does this mean we're not poor anymore?" Chloe asked when he finished. "It means we're going to be okay," Matthew said carefully. "We'll have enough money for the things we need and some of the things we want. But it doesn't change who we are or what's important, which is taking care of each other and being kind to people." "Okay." Chloe nodded seriously, then her face lit up. "Can I see what you bought?" Matthew let her open the bags one by one, watching her face light up at each new item. She held up the clothes, thrilled by the bright colors and perfect fit. She squealed over the books, immediately sitting down to examine each one and read the back covers. When he showed her the new phone, she looked at him with something like awe. "This is really mine. Really yours. So you can call me if you ever need anything. Can I call you to say goodnight when you're at work?" Matthew felt his throat tighten. "Absolutely. Anytime you want." Mrs. Patterson had tears in her eyes. "Matthew, dear, I'm so happy for you both. You deserve this." "I need to talk to you about that," Matthew said, turning to her. "I'm going to be working regular hours now, 8 to 4. I won't need childcare during the day anymore since Chloe will be in school. But I'd like to keep paying you, maybe even more, if you'd be willing to watch her after school until I get home, just for a couple hours each day." "Matthew, you don't need to pay me for that." "Yes, I do. You've been helping us out of kindness for years, and now I'm finally in a position to properly compensate you for that. Please, let me do this." Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Only if you promise to finally let me make you both dinner a few nights a week. Real dinners, not just cookies and pasta." "Deal," Matthew said, hugging her. That evening, instead of going to his cleaning job, Matthew called his supervisor and explained the situation. He gave his 2 weeks' notice and apologized for the short timing. To his surprise, the supervisor congratulated him warmly and said he had always known Matthew was destined for better things. He did the same with the warehouse the next morning, speaking to Rodriguez in person. The older man listened to the story and then clapped Matthew on the shoulder. "Good for you, Reed. You worked harder than anyone here. You earned this." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange liminal space between his old life and new one. Matthew worked out his notice at both jobs, saved every penny from those final paychecks. He spent his free time reading the training materials Harrison Industrial had provided, trying to learn as much as he could before his start date. Chloe adjusted quickly to the idea of their new circumstances, though she seemed more excited about having a phone and new books than she did about the money. Children had a way of focusing on what directly affected them, and for her, the most important change was that her father seemed happier and less stressed. Matthew took her to meet Evelyn for dinner one Saturday evening. The Reed family lived in a mansion on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place Matthew had only ever seen in magazines. But Evelyn greeted them warmly at the door, dressed simply and moving carefully with a cane. "You must be Chloe," she said, smiling down at the little girl. "Your father has told me so much about you." Chloe surprised Matthew by hugging Evelyn without hesitation. "Thank you for giving my daddy a good job," she said seriously. "He was very tired before, but now he smiles more." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Matthew over Chloe's head, and something passed between them, understanding and connection that transcended the strangeness of their situation. Dinner was surprisingly informal. Victor and his wife Diana joined them, along with their 2 teenage children. They ate in a comfortable dining room rather than anything too formal, and the conversation flowed easily. Diana asked Chloe about school and her favorite books, and the teenagers showed her their collection of fantasy novels that filled an entire wall in the library. After dinner, while the kids were occupied, Victor and Matthew spoke privately in the study. "I wanted to tell you again how much this means to us," Victor said. "My mother hasn't been this energized in months. You gave her hope at a time when she needed it desperately." "She gave me and my daughter a future," Matthew replied. "I think I got the better end of this deal." "That's the beauty of kindness, isn't it? Everyone benefits. I hope you'll think of yourself as part of our extended family now. We take care of our own." Matthew's first day at Harrison Industrial was nerve-wracking and exhilarating in equal measure. He wore one of the new suits he had bought, feeling like he was wearing a costume, but also recognizing that he looked professional and capable. David Harrison personally introduced him around the office, and his new coworkers were welcoming if a bit curious about his background. His mentor was a woman named Patricia Chun who had been with the company for 15 years. She was patient and thorough, walking him through systems and processes without making him feel stupid for asking questions. Matthew absorbed information like a sponge, taking detailed notes and staying late to review what he had learned. Within a month, he was handling basic tasks independently. Within 3 months, he was contributing ideas that his supervisors implemented. Within 6 months, he received his first promotion, a small one but accompanied by a raise and recognition that he was excelling. The money changed their lives in countless ways. Matthew and Chloe moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood with a real bedroom for each of them. He bought a reliable used car, so Chloe didn't have to take the bus to school anymore. They went to doctors and dentists regularly instead of only in emergencies. The refrigerator stayed full, and Chloe never had to worry about whether they could afford something she needed. But the more important changes were subtler. Matthew stopped looking exhausted all the time. He had energy to play with Chloe in the evenings, to help with homework, to take her places on weekends. They visited museums and parks, went to movies, did the kinds of normal family activities he had only been able to dream about before. Chloe flourished. Her grades improved, and she made more friends at school. She joined the school's reading club and discovered a love of creative writing, filling notebooks with stories that amazed her teachers. The insecurity and uncertainty that had shadowed her early childhood gradually faded, replaced by confidence and joy. Evelyn became a regular part of their lives. Despite her declining health, she insisted on weekly dinners where they would gather and share stories. She delighted in Chloe's company, and the little girl seemed to understand instinctively to be gentle with the older woman's limitations. They developed a special bond, spending hours discussing books and stories while Evelyn's Parkinson's symptoms slowly worsened. Matthew never forgot the lesson of that day outside the grocery store. He made a point of helping others when he could, donating to local charities, volunteering at the food bank, paying for groceries for people he saw struggling at checkout lines. He tried to pass on the gift he had been given, to be the person for someone else that Evelyn and Victor had been for him. A year and a half after that fateful meeting, Evelyn's health declined sharply. She moved into full-time medical care at a facility that specialized in Parkinson's patients. Matthew and Chloe visited her regularly, bringing books and stories and warmth to her days. Even as her body failed her, her mind remained sharp and her spirit strong. One afternoon, Matthew sat beside her bed while Chloe was at school. Evelyn's trembling had worsened to the point where she could barely hold a cup, but her eyes were as clear and evaluating as they had been that first day. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice weak but determined, "for giving an old woman hope when she needed it most." "I think we've thanked each other enough times," Matthew said gently. "You changed my life, Evelyn. Changed Chloe's life. There aren't words for that kind of gratitude. You know what the truth is?" Evelyn said, "You would have been fine without us. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe the road would have been harder, but you would have found a way. Men like you always do. We just made it easier and faster. But the character that got you there, that was all yours." "I'm not sure about that," Matthew said. "There were a lot of nights I wanted to give up. A lot of mornings I didn't think I could keep going. But you did keep going. For your daughter. That's what good parents do. You honor Sarah's memory every day by being an amazing father." Matthew felt tears sting his eyes. "I hope so. I try. More than try. You succeed. And Matthew? When I'm gone, Don't mourn too deeply. I've lived a full life, loved and been loved. The last year and a half, getting to know you and Chloe, that's been a gift. You gave me that. You gave us everything. No, Evelyn said firmly. I gave you an opportunity. You did everything else yourself. Evelyn passed away 3 months later, peacefully, in her sleep. The funeral was a huge affair with hundreds of people from the business community and beyond. Matthew and Chloe sat with the family in the front row, recognized now as part of the extended Reed clan. In her will, Evelyn left money for Chloe's education, enough to pay for college and graduate school if she wanted. She left Matthew a letter that he read alone in his apartment, tears streaming down his face. Dear Matthew, it said in her shaky handwriting, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, but I want you to know that meeting you was one of the great joys of my final years. You reminded me that goodness exists in the world, that people still help each other without expectation of reward. Your simple act of kindness rippled outward in ways you'll probably never fully know, touching not just our family, but everyone who has heard your story and been inspired by it. Raise your daughter well, live a good life, and remember that the character you showed that day in the parking lot is worth more than any amount of money could ever be. With love and gratitude, Evelyn. Matthew folded the letter carefully and put it in the box where he kept his most precious things, Sarah's wedding ring, photos of his wife, Chloe's first drawings, and now this final message from a woman who had changed his life. Years passed. Matthew continued to advance at Harrison Industrial, eventually becoming a senior director overseeing multiple departments. Victor remained a friend and mentor, guiding his career and including him in family gatherings. Chloe grew into a bright, compassionate teenager who wrote award-winning stories and volunteered at homeless shelters. Matthew never forgot where he came from. The struggle, the fear, the desperate calculations of how to make $3 stretch far enough. He used his position and resources to help others facing similar situations, creating a program at Harrison Industrial that specifically recruited and trained people from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them the same kind of chance he had been given. The story of how he got his job became somewhat legendary in the company, a tale told to new employees about the power of character and the importance of kindness. Matthew always felt a bit embarrassed when it came up, still seeing himself as just a guy who helped an old lady buy groceries, not some exemplar of virtue. But Chloe understood better. One day when she was 16, she asked him about that day, wanting to hear the story directly from him for a school essay she was writing. Why did you do it? She asked. Really? You knew we needed that money. Matthew thought about it, trying to find the words to explain a decision that had been more instinct than conscious choice. Your mom and I, we had a rough patch financially before you were born. There was a time when we couldn't make rent and were going to be evicted. A neighbor, someone we barely knew, paid it for us. Just handed over $600 and said to pay it forward someday. We never got a chance to pay him back. He moved away before we could. So I guess, in that moment outside the store, I was paying it forward, helping someone the way we were helped once. Did you ever find that neighbor? To thank him? No. I've looked for him over the years, but never tracked him down. Maybe that's okay though. Maybe the point isn't to pay back the specific person who helped you, but to help whoever needs it when you can. Chloe nodded thoughtfully. I think that's what I'll do too. When I'm grown up and have money, I'll help people who need it. You already do, Matthew said, thinking of all the volunteer work she did, the kindness she showed to everyone she met. You're more like your mom every day. And like you too, Chloe pointed out. Don't forget that part. Matthew hugged her tight, grateful beyond measure for this life they had built together, for the opportunities that had come from a single moment of compassion, for the reminder that kindness always mattered, even when, especially when, it cost something to give. On the wall of his office at Harrison Industrial, Matthew kept a photo from that first dinner at Evelyn's house. In it, Evelyn and Chloe sat side by side on a couch, both reading from the same book, their faces intent and happy. It reminded him daily of why he was there, of the chain of events that had begun with $2 outside a grocery store and led to all of this. Sometimes people asked him if he ever regretted giving away that money, if the momentary hardship had been worth it. Matthew always smiled at the question because it missed the point so completely. He would have given her the money either way, whether she was a billionaire's mother or a genuinely struggling stranger. That was who he was, who Sarah had helped him become, who his parents had raised him to be. The rewards that followed were unexpected and life-changing, but they weren't why he did it. You didn't help people because you might get something in return. You helped because it was right, because compassion mattered, because sometimes a small gesture could mean everything to someone who needed it. That lesson, more than the money or the job or any of the material benefits, was what he tried to pass on to Chloe. And judging by the person she was becoming, thoughtful and generous and brave, he thought maybe he was succeeding. The world could be harsh and unforgiving, could grind people down and strip away hope. Matthew knew that better than most. But it could also be surprising and generous, could offer second chances and new beginnings. The key was keeping your humanity intact through the hard times, holding on to the parts of yourself that made you decent even when it would be easier to become bitter and closed off. Matthew Reed had given his last dollar to an elderly woman outside a grocery store. In return, he had received a future, a family, and a reminder that kindness mattered more than anything else. It was, he often thought, the best $2 he had ever spent. Years later, when Chloe graduated from college with honors and a full scholarship from the fund Evelyn had established, Matthew sat in the audience and thought about that day so long ago. He thought about how scared he had been, how desperate and worried and worn down by life. He thought about Evelyn's trembling hands and assessing eyes, about the test he hadn't known he was taking, about the conversation that had changed everything. If he could go back and talk to that younger version of himself, the one standing in the parking lot counting coins and trying to decide if he could afford to be generous, what would he say? Probably just this: do it anyway. Help anyway. Be kind anyway. Not because you might get rewarded, but because it's who you want to be. Because years from now, when you look back on your life, those moments of compassion will matter more than anything else. And maybe, just maybe, if you're very lucky, kindness will return to you multiplied. But even if it doesn't, you'll know you did the right thing. And in the end, that has to be enough. Matthew applauded as Chloe crossed the stage to receive her diploma, his heart full of pride and love and gratitude for the unlikely journey that had brought them here. She caught his eye in the crowd and smiled, that brilliant smile that reminded him so much of Sarah, and he knew that whatever else happened, they were going to be okay. They had each other. They had a future full of possibilities, and they had the knowledge that small acts of kindness could change the world. What more could anyone ask for? The sun was setting outside the graduation venue, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Matthew walked out with Chloe beside him, her diploma clutched in her hands, her eyes bright with dreams and ambitions. They headed toward the car, Victor and his family waving goodbye from across the parking lot, promising to see them at the celebration dinner later. As they walked, Matthew noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several boxes toward a car. The man's arms trembled with the effort, and he looked like he might drop everything at any moment. Without hesitation, Matthew changed direction. "Excuse me, sir, let me help you with that." Chloe smiled and followed her father, already reaching for one of the boxes. The man looked at them gratefully, relief washing over his tired face. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you so much." "No problem," Matthew said, lifting the heavy boxes with ease. "We all need help sometimes." As they helped the stranger load his car, Matthew felt Chloe glance at him with understanding. She knew this story, knew where they had come from, and why they would always stop to help. The lesson had been learned and passed on, a legacy more valuable than money. The man drove away with waves and thanks, and Matthew and Chloe continued to their own car. The world kept spinning, full of people who needed help and people who could give it, full of small moments that could become big changes. Matthew Reed had learned that lesson outside a grocery store many years ago, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life. More importantly, he had taught it to his daughter, who would carry it forward into her own future. And that, more than anything else, was what truly mattered.